The morning doesn't always greet you with sunlight. Sometimes it greets you with weight. Before your feet even touch the floor, the heaviness of what the day will demand is already pressing down on your chest like a stone. And maybe you felt it. What it's like to lie there for a moment longer than usual, not because you're lazy or ungrateful, but because part of your soul is still gathering the courage to carry what yesterday didn't solve. The truth is, some mornings don't feel like beginnings. They feel like burdens. But this is where faith steps in. Not as a magic wand to remove what you carry, but as a hand that steadies you as you stand up. Jesus never said, "Come, and I will give you a light life." He said, "Take up your cross and follow me." That's not the kind of invitation that gets embroidered on throw pillows or quoted in wedding speeches, but it is the kind of invitation that transforms your life from surviving to meaningful suffering. He never said you'd avoid the cross. He said he'd walk with you through it. So today, I want to say this gently, but truthfully. Don't be afraid of your cross. Don't be ashamed of how heavy it feels. And don't assume that because it hurts, it's wrong. In fact, sometimes the pain is the evidence that you're still walking the path He's called you to. And while the world may say, drop it, numb it, escape it, the gospel says, pick it up. There's resurrection on the other side. Your cross is not a curse, it's a calling. Somewhere in the back of your mind, there may be a version of life you thought you'd be living by now. A version where the pain is past tense, the struggle is solved, and the prayers are all answered in the way you want it. And yet, here you are, waking up again under the same roof of tension, holding the same quiet grief, walking into the same workplace that drains you, or fighting the same invisible battle with your body, your mind, your future. And maybe you've asked this sacred and scary question, why this cross? Not in rebellion, not in self-pity, just in raw, human honesty. But what if the cross you're carrying isn't proof that God has forgotten you, but proof that He has trusted you? What if your cross is not a punishment, but a path? A purpose disguised as pain? It doesn't mean you chose it. It doesn't mean you enjoy it. But it does mean this: your life is not random. And what you're carrying today, as unwanted as it may feel, is part of something much larger than what you can currently see. St. Paul wrote these words in his letter to the Romans. We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who are called according to His purpose. He didn't say that all things are good. He said all things can work for good, even pain, even disappointment, even delay, and especially the cross. Let me ask you something personal. Has there ever been a season of your life where you were deeply uncomfortable but undeniably growing? Where you wouldn't wish for it again, but you also wouldn't trade what it taught you? That's the cross at work, and often the fruit of the cross isn't visible while you're carrying it. It only becomes visible later, sometimes much later, when you're finally able to see how it shaped your soul. There's a quote by Father Mike Schmitz that says, "The cross is not the end of the story, it's the path to resurrection." It's such a simple sentence, but it carries the kind of truth that can hold a soul together when nothing else makes sense. The cross isn't the closing chapter. It's the chapter that unlocks what comes next. Sometimes we think strength looks like smiling through pain, pretending nothing is wrong, or being admired for how well we manage. But real strength, Christ-like strength, is quieter. It's the woman who gets up early to make breakfast for children she's raising alone. It's the man who keeps showing up for work not because he loves it, but because someone else depends on him. It's the teenager who chooses sobriety even when no one else in their circle is. It's the 70-year-old widow who still walks into church on Sunday, even if her pew feels too empty. These people may not look like saints on the surface, but in the kingdom of God, they are heroes. Why? Because they didn't drop the cross. They picked it up again and again and again. There's another quote, this time from Corrie ten Boom. She once said, "Sometimes God doesn't take away the burden. He strengthens your back." That one hits different, doesn't it? Because we want God to lift it off completely. But sometimes what He does instead is build the muscles we didn't know we had. Spiritual endurance, quiet courage, the kind of trust that doesn't need answers to keep walking forward. But let's be honest, it's not always easy to believe that your cross is a calling, especially when it's heavy, especially when it's invisible to others, especially when you see people living lighter lives, laughing louder, achieving more, seemingly gliding through a world where everything falls into place. Comparison is a cruel thief in seasons of carrying, because it convinces you that your life is somehow broken or worse, cursed. But the cross isn't a curse. It's a sign that you've been invited into Christ's suffering and therefore into His glory. Remember what Jesus said in Luke 9:23. "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me." He didn't say occasionally. He didn't say when it's convenient. He said daily. That means every day. You're going to feel the tension of living in a world that doesn't always affirm your choices, understand your values, or reward your efforts. And yet, every day, you are still called to carry. Not because God wants you to suffer needlessly, but because every step you take with the cross becomes a witness to your children, to your co-workers, to your spouse, to a stranger watching you endure with grace. And friend, let me tell you, grace under pressure is more powerful than charisma under applause. There's a quiet kind of evangelization that happens when people watch you carry with dignity. It's not flashy. It's not Instagrammable, but it's holy, and it leaves a mark. You may be wondering, but what if I'm tired? Then rest, don't quit. Jesus Himself fell under the weight of His cross, not once, but 3 times. And each time, He stood up again. He didn't pretend it didn't hurt. He didn't smile through the agony. He just kept going, step by step, toward the purpose that made every drop of blood worth it. If the Son of God needed help carrying His cross, remember Simon of Cyrene, then why would you think you're weak for needing the same? Maybe this is your Simon moment. Maybe this message today is your reminder that you're not meant to carry it alone. That asking for help is not failure, it's faithful. And sometimes the strongest prayer isn't, "God, take this away," but "God, help me stay under it just a little longer." So how do you respond to the weight you feel this morning? You show up anyway. You pick it up, even if your hands are shaking. You whisper yes, even when your voice cracks. You don't have to love the cross, but you do have to trust the one who asked you to carry it. Because when God allows a cross into your life, He never does so without preparing the resurrection that follows. And sometimes that resurrection won't look like what you imagined. It might not be a healed body, a fixed situation, or a perfect ending. It might be a renewed spirit, a deeper compassion, a stronger relationship with God, a story that blesses someone else, a kind of freedom you didn't know existed, freedom not from pain, but within it. This morning, as you sit with your own cross, remember this. It doesn't have to be pretty to be holy. It doesn't have to make sense to be sacred. It doesn't have to be seen by others to be significant. And most importantly, it doesn't have to be permanent to be powerful. You may not get applause for the cross you carry, but heaven is watching. And the one who carried his cross all the way to Calvary knows every step of yours. He sees you, he's with you, and he's already gone ahead of you. So if today is heavy, if the road feels long, if the load feels unfair, breathe this truth into your soul. You are not cursed. You are called. And the cross you carry is not the end. It's the beginning of something eternal.
Strength is built in the stretch. It doesn't always feel like strength while it's being built. In fact, sometimes it feels more like breaking, like stretching too far, like you're being asked to carry more than you were made for. And maybe you felt that too. That moment where life pulls you in 10 directions, none of which feel fair or feasible, and yet somehow you're still standing, still showing up, still doing the thing no one sees. We don't often recognize strength in the moment we're building it, because strength doesn't always announce itself with loud victories or epic milestones. Most of the time, it shows up in the quiet stretch, when you choose to love anyway, forgive again, get up with sore feet, pray when you're tired, and believe even when you're bruised by doubt. The truth is, we all have a breaking point. But what if that breaking point is also your building point? Jesus never promised we'd be spared the tension. In fact, he said the opposite. In John 16:33, he told his disciples, "In this world you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world." He didn't say you might face trouble. He said you will. And he didn't say avoid it. He said, face it with heart, with courage, with trust in the one who already stretched himself to the edge of the cross for you. The greatest transformations in your life don't come in comfort. They come in the stretch between where you are and where you're called to be. The stretch between what you feel and what you know is right. The stretch between surrender and survival. And it's in that tension where something eternal is happening. Whether you see it or not, let me tell you about someone who knows what the stretch feels like. Angela is a 41-year-old nurse from Florence, Italy. She's not famous. She doesn't have a platform. She's not the type to write a book or post a TED Talk. But if you could watch her mornings, you'd see strength in its rawest, realest form. Her husband, Carlo, died of a sudden stroke during the second wave of the pandemic. One day, they were planning a weekend trip. The next, she was signing hospital paperwork and trying to explain to her two boys, ages 6 and 9, that Daddy wasn't coming home. The grief was sharp. It came in waves like cold water dumped over her heart every time she thought of the empty chair at the dinner table. But the bills didn't stop. The boys still needed to eat. Her hospital was still short-staffed. So every morning, before the sun broke the horizon, Angela would quietly slide out of bed, kiss her children on the forehead, and walk out into the streets of Florence with her scrubs and her tired soul. She told a friend once, "There were mornings I didn't feel like a person. I felt like a shadow. But I also knew someone was depending on me to show up. My kids, my patients, maybe even God." One morning, as she was adjusting her surgical mask in the changing room, a younger nurse whispered, "How are you still doing this?" Angela looked at her, eyes lined with exhaustion, and simply said, "Because every time I think I can't take one more step, I remember who I'm walking with." Angela never called herself strong, but strength was written in every step she took. And you might be more like Angela than you realize. Maybe no one claps for what you do behind the scenes. Maybe no one sees you cooking that meal, going to that job you don't love, praying for someone who's broken your heart, holding in tears for the sake of your children, staying silent to keep peace at home, biting your tongue when all you want to do is scream. But strength isn't built in applause. It's built in resistance, in holding the tension between what hurts and what heals, and choosing to walk forward anyway. There's a quote from Mother Teresa that says, "We are not called to be successful, but faithful." And faithfulness, my friend, often lives in the stretch, in the messy middle between what you pray for and what you carry. William Barclay once said, "Endurance is not just the ability to bear a hard thing, but to turn it into glory." And isn't that the call of the Christian life? Not just to survive, but to offer even our survival as worship? There's something holy in that, in turning the stretch into strength, not because you were born with it, but because God meets you in it. Look, the world will sell you shortcuts. It will say, "Take the easy way. You deserve a break. You've done enough." And yes, rest is sacred. Boundaries are healthy. But there's a difference between resting and retreating. There's a difference between healing and hiding. Don't confuse one for the other. The stretch is uncomfortable, but it's not punishment. It's preparation. God is not just watching your life. He's shaping it, molding it, refining you like gold in fire. And the fire isn't to destroy, it's to reveal, to burn away the lies you believed about yourself, to melt off the masks you've worn to cope, to stretch you into the person you were created to become. Not someone who avoids the cross, but someone who can carry it with courage. And yes, courage is a choice. It's not something you wait to feel. It's something you decide to step into, even when your knees are trembling. So what can you do when you feel stretched to your limits? You return to truth. You remind yourself, I am not here by accident. This season is not wasted. This pain is not pointless. I am being stretched, not shattered. And with God, every hard thing has the potential to become a holy thing. Maybe your stretch today is in your body, an illness that lingers, fatigue that drags, aches that remind you you're not who you used to be. Maybe it's in your mind, a swirl of anxiety and unspoken fear, the weight of decisions that keep you up at night. Maybe it's in your relationships, a conversation you don't know how to start, a forgiveness you don't know how to give, a child whose choices leave your heart bruised every time the phone rings. Wherever the stretch is, God is not outside of it. He's in it. Right in the middle of the pain you can't put into words, He's whispering, I'm here. I'm holding you through this. Keep going. You're stronger than you think. I know it would be easier if God just removed the weight, if He just solved it, fixed it, ended the discomfort. But sometimes He strengthens us by not removing it, by standing beside us as we carry it, by letting the stretch transform our spirit before the situation changes. Think of Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane, that moment before His passion, where He sweat blood and begged, Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Even the Son of God asked to be spared the stretch, but then He added, Yet not my will, but yours be done. That's strength, not denial, not avoidance, but surrender. And maybe today the most courageous thing you can say is, I don't like this, I wouldn't choose this, but I'll carry it with you, Lord. Because strength doesn't always look like having it together. Sometimes it looks like tears in the dark and a whisper of faith that refuses to go out. Like a candle that flickers in the storm but won't be snuffed. Like a soul that says, I'm still here and I'm still walking. So what does the stretch look like in your life right now? And how might God be using it? Not to break you, but to build you. Maybe the answer won't come today. Maybe it won't come tomorrow, but if you stay with it, if you keep walking, one day you'll look back and realize the strength you prayed for didn't come from ease. It came from every moment you chose to stretch, to trust, to step. And let's get really honest here. Growth is uncomfortable. Healing is uncomfortable. Forgiveness is uncomfortable. Change is uncomfortable. But you weren't called to comfort. You were called to Christ, and He lives in the stretch. He stretched out His arms on the cross to show you what love looks like when it costs everything. So when your life stretches you to the point of pain, when you feel like your heart is being pulled in ways you didn't ask for, remember His arms are already open. You're not alone. You're not abandoned. You're being held even in the pull. And if no one else sees it, if no one else says it, let me say it to you now. You are doing holy work when you carry what others can't see. You are becoming strong in the exact places you feel weakest, and you are closer to breakthrough than you know. So today, pick up your cross, feel the stretch, walk into it, not with fear, but with fierce trust, and whisper as you go, I'm not being broken, I'm being built.
God doesn't waste your wounds. Some hurts don't heal the way you thought they would. They don't disappear on schedule or wrap themselves up with some poetic closure. They stay, maybe not as sharp as the day they happened, but deep enough that even time can't erase them fully. Maybe you've learned to live around your wound. You function, you smile, you even thrive in moments. But somewhere under the laughter, there's still a quiet ache, an echo of what broke you. And if you're honest, maybe you've asked, what's the point of this pain? That's not a lack of faith. That's a deeply human question. And if no one else has said it, let me say it now. God is not offended by your aching honesty. He meets you there. You don't need to sanitize your story before you bring it to God. The broken parts are not a liability to Him. They are the very places where grace makes its home. There's a line in Isaiah that reads, by His wounds we are healed. That's not just theology. It's a revelation of how God works. Through wounds, through breaking, through what the world would rather throw away. Jesus didn't avoid pain. He entered it. He didn't skip the cross. He embraced it. And in doing so, He made something unthinkable into something redemptive. And if that's what He did with His wounds, what might He do with yours? There's a man I met once who reminded me of this truth in a way I've never forgotten. His name is Mateo. He's 29 and lives in Buenos Aires. Before his accident, he was a rising star in Argentina's national gymnastics program. He'd trained since he was 6. He had medals, sponsors, a future that looked like gold. But during a regional competition, a simple misstep on a vault changed everything. He landed wrong, snapped vertebrae, and was instantly paralyzed from the waist down. He told me the first few months after the accident didn't feel real. He kept thinking he'd wake up from the nightmare. He begged God, angrily, bitterly, to give him back his legs, not for vanity, not even for sport, but just to be able to walk to the kitchen, to dance at his sister's wedding, to live without help. But silence was all he heard. No healing, no miracle, just the humming of fluorescent hospital lights and the endless ache of loss. One day, stuck in bed with nothing but time and rage, he opened an old prayer book his grandmother used to carry, not out of faith, out of desperation. And there, tucked between worn pages, he found a scrap of paper with a handwritten prayer she must have left behind. It read, God, don't let my pain be wasted. If I must bleed, let it bloom. He stared at it for a long time. Then with trembling hands, he prayed, not for healing, but for purpose. God, he whispered, I don't know what you're doing, but if you're real, use this. Use me. That was the beginning, not of a cure, but of a calling. Today, Mateo volunteers at a rehab center for young people with spinal injuries. He teaches them how to move forward, literally and emotionally. He says, I lost my sport, but I found something better. I found my soul. There's a light in his eyes when he says that. Not fake cheerfulness, not denial, just peace. Hard-earned peace, wounded peace. The kind that only comes when you let God into the places that feel too painful to look at. What happened to Mateo wasn't fair, and God didn't cause it, but God didn't waste it either. And that's the truth you need to hold on to right now. Your pain may not have been chosen, but it is not without purpose. The wound you carry doesn't disqualify you. It qualifies you to understand others more deeply, to love more gently, to speak with the kind of wisdom that only comes from surviving what tried to break you. The world has trained us to hide our wounds, to dress them up, to distract from them. But the gospel invites us to bring them into the light, not because pain is good in itself, but because when placed in God's hands, even pain can be redeemed. Lysa TerKeurst once said, God will use what you've been through to shape who you're meant to be. That's not just a nice thought, it's a spiritual law. Nothing surrendered is ever wasted in God's economy. Not your tears, not your sleepless nights, not your moments of collapse when the world became too much. There is something sacred in scars. They don't mean the wound never happened. They mean it healed. And healing, true healing, is never just for you. It always becomes a gift for others. Have you ever noticed that the risen Christ still had scars? He could have returned flawless, radiant, untouched by the agony of the cross, but he didn't. He let Thomas touch the wound in his side. Why? Because he wasn't ashamed of the suffering. He wanted his friends to see, I was broken too, but I'm still here. And maybe that's what your wounds are meant to be, not erased, but transformed. Not evidence of your failure, but evidence of your survival. I know you might not feel brave. You might not feel holy. You might feel like a pile of contradictions, full of faith one day and sinking in sorrow the next. But God doesn't require perfection from you. He asks for honesty and availability. If you're willing to bring him your wounds, he will bring beauty from them. Not always immediately, not always the way you expected, but always in a way that matters. Because he is the same God who turned Joseph's betrayal into rescue for an entire nation, who used Moses' stutter to speak to kings, who made David's deepest regrets the backdrop for psalms we still pray today, and who took Peter's denial and turned it into a bold, world-changing faith. God is still doing that today, still turning wounds into wonders. But here's the thing, it requires your cooperation. It requires you to stop pretending, to stop numbing, to stop pushing it down and telling yourself you should be over it by now. You're allowed to hurt, you're allowed to cry, and you're allowed to bring that hurt to the altar like an offering. God doesn't ask for pretty prayers, he asks for real ones. So if all you can say today is, God, I'm still hurting, then say that. Say it with your whole heart, because honesty is where healing begins. And as you sit with the ache, I want to tell you something gently but clearly. Your wound may be where the light enters. Not just your own life, but the lives of those around you. When people see you worship, even when you're weary, love, even when you've been let down, and show up, even when your soul is sore, they see something sacred. They see resurrection power at work. And sometimes your life becomes someone else's proof that healing is possible. Not because you've reached perfection, but because you're walking, wounded in the direction of God. That's the kind of strength that changes the world. Quiet, relentless, rooted in something deeper than self-help or positive thinking. Rooted in a Savior who knows every fracture of your heart and still calls you beloved. So if you're holding a wound today, physical, emotional, spiritual. Don't rush it. Don't minimize it. Let it speak. Let it teach you. Let it soften you. Let it draw you closer to the one who was wounded for you. Because maybe, just maybe, your wound isn't a sign you've been abandoned. Maybe it's the exact place where you're being drawn into communion with the crucified Christ. Maybe your brokenness is where your calling begins. Maybe your story, the real one, with all its mess and ache, is the very thing God wants to use. So bring it. Bring the whole story. Not the polished version. Not the after photo. Bring the pain in its rawest form. Bring the tears and the questions and the shaky faith, and trust that somehow, in the mystery of God's mercy, your pain will not return void. The cross didn't make sense until Sunday came, and maybe your Sunday hasn't come yet, but it will. And when it does, you'll look back and say, God didn't waste a thing.
Faith means walking, even when it hurts. There's a certain kind of pain that doesn't scream, it whispers. It lingers quietly under everything, making even the smallest tasks feel heavier than they should. You wake up and the day feels like a mountain. You smile, but it feels like lifting bricks. You pray, but even your prayers are tired. And yet somehow, you keep going. That right there is faith. Not the loud kind that fills stadiums or the easy kind that floats on sunshine days, but the kind that shows up in the dark. The kind that keeps walking even when the path disappears. The kind that stays when there's no applause, no clarity, no rescue in sight, only trust. Faith isn't always about feeling certain. Sometimes it's simply about staying when everything in you wants to run. It's choosing to believe that God is still good even when nothing looks good. And if you've been there, if you're there now, you're not weak. You're not behind. You're walking the very road Christ himself walked, the road of Gethsemane, the road of silence, the road of aching trust. And there's something sacred about that walk. Sebastian knows what that walk feels like. He's 63 years old and lives in Lille, a quiet city in northern France. If you saw him at the cafe he visits every Tuesday, you might think he's just another retiree reading the newspaper, but there's a whole history behind the softness in his eyes. Years ago, Sebastian had a full life, a beloved wife, a bright daughter, a job he enjoyed at a local printing press. He had faith too. He'd sing at church, volunteer at Sunday meals, walk arm in arm with his wife to daily mass. Then, one rainy night, his daughter was struck by a drunk driver on her way home from a friend's birthday. She didn't make it. 3 years later, Sebastian's wife passed from breast cancer. And just like that, the life he knew dissolved. His prayers became shorter. His visits to church stopped. He didn't lose faith overnight. He just couldn't feel it anymore. He told me, "It wasn't that I stopped believing in God. I just didn't know what to say to him." Grief does that. It leaves you speechless. And yet, somewhere in that silence, something new can begin. One Sunday morning, nearly 2 decades after he last stepped into a church, Sebastian walked past the chapel he used to attend. It hadn't changed. The same creaky wooden door, the same stained glass catching the light. Something pulled at him. He didn't go in, not that day. But he came back the next, and the next. On the 3rd day, he sat in the very last pew. He didn't pray out loud. He didn't cry. He just sat. That became his new rhythm. Every day for weeks he returned, still grieving, still carrying his pain, still unsure. But something had shifted. He had started walking again, slowly, painfully, silently, but walking. He told me, "I thought I had left God, but it turns out he never left me." There's a line in Psalm 23 that most of us have heard so many times, it risks losing its power. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. It doesn't say, even though I run from the valley. It says, I walk through it. Because faith isn't always a sprint. Sometimes it's a shuffle. Sometimes it's a one step, one breath, one moment at a time journey through the hardest terrain you've ever faced. And it's holy. So if today your faith doesn't look like celebration or shouting or certainty, if it looks like just getting out of bed, just saying one line of a prayer, just whispering, God, I'm here, that's still faith. You're still on the path. Charles Spurgeon once said, to trust God in the light is nothing, but to trust Him in the dark, that is faith. And some of the most powerful moves of God happen not in the daylight of resolution, but in the nighttime of persistence. You may not have the answers. You may not feel the fire. But if your heart is still turned toward Him, if you're still walking, even limping, then heaven is closer than you think. Faith doesn't wait for the hurt to stop before it starts moving. It walks with the hurt, through it, around it, despite it. And it's in those moments when you feel empty and yet you still go to work, still check in on your family, still pray, still love, that your faith becomes not just real, but radiant. Not because you feel brave, but because you're walking with a God who walked this road first. When Jesus carried the cross, He wasn't dancing toward destiny. He was bleeding, shaking, stumbling forward, but He walked. He kept moving. Because love doesn't stop when it hurts, it endures. And now you carry your own cross. Maybe it's not made of wood and nails, but it weighs just as much. Maybe it's an addiction you're fighting in secret. Maybe it's a marriage that feels more like survival than connection. Maybe it's a financial weight, or a medical report, or a silent sadness that no one knows. Whatever your cross is, it matters. And walking with it, even when it feels like too much, is an act of sacred defiance against despair. So if no one else applauds your journey, let me be the one to say this. You are walking in faith. You are not a failure because you're limping. You are not less spiritual because you still hurt. You are not less beloved because you don't have answers. You are proving that faith is not about having everything together. It's about holding on to the one who holds everything. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just not quit. There's a quiet kind of victory in persistence, a holy kind of strength in just showing up, and it's not wasted. God sees every trembling step, and don't think for a second that walking in faith means ignoring your feelings. Jesus wept. Jesus sweated blood. Jesus cried out on the cross, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" He knows the language of anguish. He's fluent in your pain. And He walks beside you, not as a distant deity, but as a Savior who knows the cost of every tear. So if all you can do today is walk, do it. If all you can offer is your breath and your presence, bring it. If you can't pray the long prayers, pray the short ones. If you can't stand tall, lean. If you can't feel joy, hold hope. Because every step you take in the direction of Christ is rewriting your story. You don't need to wait until you feel strong to walk in faith. You walk, and the strength comes along the way. One day, you'll look back on this stretch of road, not with shame, but with reverence. Not because you were unshakable, but because you were upheld. Not because you were fearless, but because you were faithful. And maybe that's the most beautiful testimony of all. So take the next step, even if you're afraid, even if it hurts, even if it doesn't make sense. Take the step. Because walking in pain is still walking. And walking in faith, even with wounds, is walking toward resurrection. The cross you carry today will crown you tomorrow. You won't always see it now. In fact, most days, it won't feel like anything is changing at all. You'll carry the same weight, walk the same stretch, endure the same silence. But beneath the surface of your faithfulness, something sacred is forming. It's easy to forget in the middle of the hard and hidden that God is never idle. Just because you don't see the fruit yet doesn't mean the seed isn't growing. And just because you're still under the cross doesn't mean your crown isn't coming. The world will measure your life by what you produce, what you achieve, what you post. But heaven measures differently. God sees what you carried when no one clapped, what you surrendered when it cost everything, what you chose to believe when nothing made sense. And that's why the cross you carry today, though painful, though private, though lonely, will never go unnoticed, not by God and not in eternity. Timothy 2:12 says, "If we suffer with him, we will also reign with him." That isn't poetic exaggeration. It's the spiritual law of resurrection. The suffering you embrace today becomes the glory you walk in tomorrow. Not because you earned it, but because you were willing to walk through it. And that truth comes to life in people who live it, not loudly, but faithfully. Like Annika, she's 35 years old and lives just outside Munich, Germany. A school teacher by profession, the kind of person you'd pass on the street without knowing the weight she carries. After years of praying and trying, she and her husband were told they wouldn't be able to have children. The news gutted her. She dreamed of motherhood since she was a little girl, lining up dolls and naming them one by one, and now, at the edge of that dream, it vanished. She told me, "There was a time I couldn't walk into a grocery store without avoiding the baby aisle." The grief came in waves, some quiet, some brutal. But Annika didn't disappear into bitterness. She brought her pain to prayer, not to be erased, but to be offered. She began volunteering at a nearby children's shelter. Then volunteering turned into weekend care, and weekend care turned into guardianship. Before long, she was waking up at 5 a.m. to prepare breakfast for 12 children, none of them biologically hers, but all of them carried in her heart. She said, "I didn't get the story I wanted, but maybe this was the story I was meant to carry." And isn't that the cross? The surrender of the life we imagined so we can live the one God calls us into? Annika doesn't walk through her days wearing a halo. She still aches sometimes, still wonders what might have been. But when she tucks those kids in at night, when she teaches them how to tie their shoes or sit through homework, when they call her mama without hesitation, she carries more than just a cross. She carries a crown, a quiet one, invisible to most, but real, eternal. And so do you. Maybe your life hasn't gone the way you thought it would. Maybe the prayers you prayed weren't answered the way you hoped. Maybe the doors you waited on never opened. But if you kept showing up, if you kept carrying your cross, then you are not behind. You are becoming. And one day, maybe not here, but in heaven, your knees will bend and your hands will open, and God will place a crown on your head made of every hard thing you endured with grace. Every night you didn't give up. Every moment you chose love over resentment. Every small act of obedience that no one noticed but him. Thomas à Kempis once wrote, "Carry the cross patiently, and in the end it will carry you." What a paradox. The thing that feels like a burden now may become the very thing that lifts you higher than you imagined. Not in the eyes of the world, but in the eyes of God. So don't despise what you're carrying. Don't wish away the process. Don't assume your pain disqualifies you. This season, this stretch, this sacrifice, it's not meaningless, it's making you. God isn't just watching you carry your cross, He's walking beside you, strengthening you, cheering for you in the silence, and preparing a crown you can't see yet. So let today be the day you keep going. even if it's hard, even if no one claps, even if you feel like quitting. Because the crown is not for the fastest, or the loudest, or the most celebrated. It's for the faithful. The ones who carried their cross not because they loved pain, but because they loved the one who carried it first. You may not feel holy, you may not feel strong, but your faithfulness is writing a legacy that will outlast the pain. So keep going. Carry it all the way. A final word for your journey. If you've stayed with this message until now, maybe it's because something deep inside you is still holding on, still believing, still hoping. And that hope matters more than you know. I don't know what cross you carry today. I don't know how long you've been carrying it, or how badly it hurts. But I do know this: you are not alone. You are not forgotten, and you are not unseen. Heaven has been watching you this whole time, and even if the world doesn't understand your struggle, even if the people around you don't fully grasp what it takes just to get through the day, you are seen by the one who stretched his arms wide for you, who bled for you, who rose for you, and who now walks with you in every step you take under the weight of what you bear. So don't drop your cross. Don't give up. Because the cross you carry today, it will crown you tomorrow. And if no one else says it to you today, let me say it now. You're doing better than you think. You're carrying more than others can see, and you're loved far more deeply than you realize. You've got this, not because you're strong enough, but because He is. Walk forward, one faithful step at a time, all the way home.